With a name like minimalism, you might think there couldn't be much to it. But there's enough to this 1960s art movement for both the St. Louis Art Museum and the Pulitzer Foundation to present their own minimalist exhibitions. Understanding minimalism calls for suspending much of what we think art is, or should be. It was a reaction to the work of the post-war abstract expressionists who created emotional explosions of colors and textures, diaries of the artist's feelings at a particular moment. Minimalism sought something more permanent. It was cool, incorporated new industrial materials, featured geometry and repetition, and most importantly, avoided any trace of the artist's feelings, insisting that the viewer complete the experience.
Art is a whole series of reactions against what came before. So the minimal artists and the pop artists who were involved with different kinds of industrial fabrications and using industrial processes were reacting against the handmade quality of an abstract expressionist painting, where paint is just slopped across the surface in these big broad gestures. The minimalists wanted to have absolutely no personal content or metaphor or any sense of illusion in their work. They just wanted to make something that was what it was, no explanation necessary.
Okay, but is it art?
Well, that's a very complex question. I am not sure whether the experience of the works is really helped by asking oneself the question, is this art or is this not art? Finally, although you will always come back to that question. But finally, it is much more than just the question, is this art? The question is, does this have an impact on me? Does this move me? Does this make me see things differently?
This painting by Frank Stella, it looks very much as if it's black paint on a big canvas.
And Stella would have been the first person to point out that it's black paint on canvas, and he would like to say nothing more than that. It has a geometric composition, it focuses on one color, and it really is a kind of a literal exploration of the paint and the canvas. But having said that, Stella also contradicts himself with the title of the painting, because if you really wanted someone to understand the piece as straight, literal paint on canvas, you would probably call it Untitled or Painting, but he titles this piece Marriage of Reason and Squalor.
So minimalist art isn't just about the work itself, it's about what the viewer experiences. And that depends largely on where the art is exhibited.
I think one of the most interesting things about minimalism is that it engages its architectural surroundings directly. So for example, the sculpture by Carl Andre rests directly on the floor. There's no pedestal underneath it. It's about the relationship of these industrially fabricated aluminum squares to the floor, and it's in the composition of a grid. And also, the visitor in this case is actually invited to really just walk on the piece, so it's engaged directly with the floor and with the viewer.
You can walk on the art.
You can walk on this art. I know it's confusing because you can walk on the Carl Andre sculpture, but we hope you don't walk on anything else in the show.
At the Pulitzer, we have minimalist art exhibited in a minimalist building, and that creates some interesting possibilities.
And I'll give you an example. If you take this column behind you, which is a very classical architectural feature, solid space, if you wish, and then you go from there and look into the doorway, which is the opposite. One could call this a negative space. And this negative space is defined by the wall behind and by the light that pours in from both sides. And then you go to another rectangle, which is Stacks by Donald Judd, and they combine the positive and the negative space. And they seem to be a column, although they're not. They seem to be an architectural feature, although they're not. They, on the one hand, they seem to be an architectonical feature, and on the other hand, they take possession of the space.
So if this piece of artwork were exhibited somewhere else, in a different space, it would take on a different meaning?
Different meaning, maybe it would have a different impact. Normally one says art is something intrinsic, so an artwork is intrinsically art. And that is a very romantic idea. Whereas these artists that we present here, their works only exist within the space. So in the case of the boxes by Donald Judd, you see, when you look through this tunnel, you see a reflection, from our perspective at least, of blue-black by Ellsworth Kelly. And this blue of blue-black is reflected on the blue plexiglass inside the boxes.
Both the Pulitzer and the Art Museum exhibit works by Dan Flavin, whose creations combine sculpture and light and depend entirely on where and how they are exhibited.
Flavin did a series of pieces called corner pieces that were 8 feet long and hung at a very particular height, and they really relied upon the room to be part of the sculpture. The reason this piece has been installed by itself in the room is the color is meant to engage the entire space.
So experiencing minimalist art is about, well, the experience. It invites us to perceive art in new ways. It's not surprising that it developed during a decade when we began to see lots of things in new ways.
These artists are responding to things like space exploration and science with its interest in visual perception and physical perception. There were experiments with weightlessness and with different ways that the eye sees things depending upon what's next to what and what the light level is. And you can also see it in their choice of materials. They were very interested in materials that were being developed for scientific purposes, certain kinds of metals, certain kinds of plastics, and they were using those materials to make their sculpture instead of traditional art-making materials like bronze.
One piece on display at the Art Museum consists of nails, wire, and a simple set of installation instructions. At the Pulitzer, a work by Felix Gonzalez Torres begins as a vague set of instructions about a pile of candy.
So all the artist really said was 350 pounds of candy, silver wrapped, any flavor, and you buy the candy and put it any way you want.
Yeah. So in a way, you have an artwork that does not exist. It's just the recipe of an artwork. And then you have the materialness of it. But interestingly enough, the status of an artwork, and here we speak about a status, stops the very moment the loan ends. So all these candies, once our installation is over, it's just a pile of candies. And it's no more something that is endorsed by the artist.
And if we keep coming back to the question of why is this art, maybe it's because there really isn't an answer. That art might well be whatever an artist says is art. And the value of it all lies within the experience itself.